Welcome to the Becoming Your Best Version podcast. I'm your host, Maria Leonard Olson. I'm a civil litigation attorney in Washington, D.C. I am a TEDx speaker, a mentor to women in recovery, an author, a journalist, and more. You can learn about me at marialeonardolson.com. And if you would hit the like button on my TEDx talks, I would greatly appreciate it. And the best gift you can give to an author is to leave a review for their book. Even one word helps because there's an algorithm which affects the visibility of the book. So I started this podcast 6 years ago because my work in the realm of women in midlife brought me into contact with amazing women who have inspired me and I think will inspire you. Today, we have Lisa Skinner joining us. She's a behavioral expert in the field of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. In her 20-year career as a community counselor and regional director of senior care facilities, she has helped thousands of families find the best care options for their loved ones. She holds an administrative license through California, and as a trainer, advisor, and public speaker, she has dedicated her career to teaching people the skills to effectively manage brain disease. She wrote a book called Not All Who Wander Need Be Lost: Stories of Hope for Families Facing Alzheimer's and Dementia. For those who are coping with loved ones afflicted with a dementia-related illness and crumbling with the anguish of helplessly standing by, watching their loved one decline, and not knowing how to make it better for all who are affected. You can learn more at allseniorsafeandsound.com and follow her on Facebook. All of this is in the show notes. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks for having me, Maria. It's a delight to be here.
So, how did you get involved in this area?
Well, believe me, when I was a little girl growing up, I don't remember ever once saying when I grow up, I want to work in the dementia world.
Yeah.
But when I was 16, I went to visit my grandmother who lived just a few miles from my family home. And I was expecting, saw her all the time. She lived very close. I grew up with her. And I had just gotten my driver's license and I wanted to show that off to her. So I drove over there. I told my mom I was going to go visit grandma. So she invites me in the house. We sit down in her living room and she starts frantically telling me about these birds that were living in her mattress and that they would come out at night and peck on her face. And then she pointed to her living room carpet and asked me if I saw all the rats that were running around and that they were invading her home. And then she proceeded to tell me about these men that were constantly breaking into her home, stealing her jewelry, eating all her food, and she was terrified. She said she was convinced that they were eventually going to do away with her.
Mm.
Well, this was not the conversation I was expecting to have with her. I didn't even know anything was wrong with my grandmother. And I had told my mom I was going over there, and she didn't say a word to me. So, anyway, um, that stayed with me throughout my entire life. And then since then, I've had seven more family members who have fallen to one of the brain diseases that causes dementia. So um, later on, when I went to college, I was trying to decide what I wanted to get my degree in. And I took a human behavior course and I was sold. I mean, it was so fascinating to me. What makes people tick? Why do they behave a certain way, like in an organizational setting versus a social setting? You probably use um, behavioral science a lot when litigating cases because, trying to figure out the jurors and things like that. My dad was a litigating attorney, so I know that he did. So anyway, all roads led to me doing this professionally. So I became a certified dementia practitioner. I'm a certified dementia care trainer through the Alzheimer's Association. I've got a couple other certifications, and I also, because of my experience with my own family members, I realized the anguish that families go through. And it's such a long, drawn out disease. My grandmother lived another 20 years with it.
Yeah.
And all of the, the peculiar behaviors and the signs and the symptomology that accompany brain disease um, are very misunderstood, very complex. So I wanted to be a reliable resource for other families that were going through this, especially due to all of the, misinformation, disinformation, all the myths that circulate around that are actually very harmful to people trying to figure out what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it.
Yeah. Wow. You also co-wrote a book called Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's, Its Secret Faces.
I did.
Tell us about that book.
That book is really a fundamental introduction to what to expect when you are in a situation, either you're caring for somebody or you have a loved one who displays these very peculiar behaviors, like my experience going over to my grandmother's house, and why they occur, what's happening to the brain as it's changing due to the damage being done by one of these brain diseases, and then some recommendations on the most effective ways to respond to different questions, like, for example, what if my loved one doesn't recognize me? Um, so the reason why I felt this was so important to raise awareness about this is because, as you see on that book, these effective responses are literally counterintuitive to the way that we are instinctively wired to respond, which is to correct the person. We want to fix people, especially our loved ones. And that only creates more anxiety and stress amongst everybody involved. So people really need to be taught how to effectively react and respond to a lot of these behaviors that accompany these diseases.
What's an example of an effective response?
So one of the things that's very common that I can share because it happens, almost to everybody, is there comes a point in time where, especially with Alzheimer's disease, because the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease is um, it impacts the short-term memory first. So people, while they're progressing through the disease, their short-term memories are sometimes functioning perfectly well, and other times they have malfunctioned, and then they're going back to pulling from their long-term memories because long-term memories stay intact. So to give you an example, let's say I went to visit my grandmother. This didn't happen, but let's say she answered the door and she didn't have a clue who I was. She didn't recognize me. Says to me, who are you and what do you want? How can I help you? So the instinctive response for somebody would be, Grandma, what's the matter with you? Don't you recognize me? It's Lisa. I'm your granddaughter. That is actually in the dementia world, that's an ineffective response. And the reason why is because my grandmother believed if this had happened that way, just like she believed in the rats and she believed in the men and she believed in the birds, if she stated that to me, it's because she believed in her reality, in her mind, that she didn't recognize me. She didn't have a clue who I was. So I've been trained to practice what's called a person-centered approach to dementia care. It's been around maybe 20 years. It was called reality orientation therapy when I first started doing this professionally and counseling families. The difference is reality orientation therapy emphasizes correcting and fixing and trying to steer the person with dementia back into the healthy brain, the brain of the healthy person's reality. Now, what people didn't quite understand is her reality is just as real to her as my reality is to me, but they are not aligned.
Hmm.
They are incongruent.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that she doesn't 100% believe what she's saying.
Yes.
So we do now what's called join their reality. And so I meet her more where she's at in her mind's eye than trying to steer her back into my mind's eye, which are completely different until she regains the her short-term memory because it kind of toggles in and out during this whole process to the very end.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. So, how can people distinguish between normal aging, forgetfulness, and dementia?
That is a very tough situation. It's almost impossible.
Hmm.
And because of that, most doctors do not even try to make as accurate a diagnosis as they possibly can until the person is well into the mid stage of the illness, because the symptoms are so subtle in the beginning of the disease. As a matter of fact, this is a true fact. Many people live with Alzheimer's developing in their brains for a decade or more, and they're completely asymptomatic. They're not showing any symptoms at all. So
Wow.
this is where the rubber meets the road and makes the situation so incredibly difficult, because in the very beginning stages of Alzheimer's disease or one of the other over 100 brain diseases that cause dementia, the signs are extremely subtle, and it's almost impossible to differentiate between normal aging forgetfulness. I call them memory hiccups,
Hmm.
and something more serious developing in the brain, like a brain disease.
Yeah.
Um, so, what I tell people is it is not uncommon for us to start having these little memory hiccups around midlife, age 40, and starting at about that point, where we start to forget certain things. Like I can tell you with me personally, sometimes I walk into a room, like I'm going into my kitchen, and I walk in there and I look around and I just cannot for the life of me remember what I went in there for. That's
Hmm.
a very, very common occurrence with normal aging forgetfulness. You walk out, you start going back to the room you came from, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, now I remember. Or you forget a friend's name, or you misplace you set your iPhone down, your smartphone, and you're calling it, you're retracing your steps, you cannot remember where you set it down. These are all examples of normal aging forgetfulness, and it is not a reason to be concerned or worried. What tends to happen by mid stage of dementia And I'm using dementia referring to all of the brain diseases because the symptomologies are very similar and they're intertwined, they're interrelated. So, for that purpose, we refer to these diseases as dementia. It's kind of one bucket that really is synonymous with the symptoms
Mhm.
that we see, the behaviors that we see. Um, so, so when people really should feel that there's a legitimate cause for concern is when these symptoms start to happen more frequently, they become more severe, they become very obvious to others, and a lot of times to the person who's experiencing them. And they start to interfere with their daily life, like really have an impact. Things that were once very easy to do become challenging. Putting a simple grocery list together, balancing a checkbook. I don't even know if anybody does that anymore, but yeah. But that's one example. And they start, some people, when they get to that mid stage, this is another common behavior, they will ask the same question over and over and over in the same conversation
Mhm.
because they don't remember that they just asked it 5 seconds ago because of the short term memory. It's gone, or it's malfunctioned, or it's short circuited for a temporary period of time. Or the other thing that people do, they fidget with things with their hands, their fingers, or they tell the same story. Like, oh, I had an experience once upon a time when I was a teenager and I went to the beach and blah, 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 blah. And then 5 seconds later, they're telling the same exact story again in that same conversation. These are called repetitive behaviors, and they are actually fairly common in people living with dementia because of the short-term memory kind of flipping on and flipping off as like a switch, and they seriously don't remember that they just either asked you that question or told you that story right before they started saying it again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I read somewhere that if you keep forgetting where your keys are, that's normal. But if you forget what keys are used for, that's problematic. Is that
That
an apt description?
that is actually a very true statement. So another good example is, okay, let's say you're a coffee drinker, and for decades, you get out of bed, you're still kind of groggy, a little bit sleepy. You find your way into your kitchen, and you've been turning that coffee maker on for so long that you don't even have to think about it. You just go there and you push the right button. The difference is if it's truly dementia, there could come a day where you would walk into that kitchen and see the coffee maker sitting there, and you would be absolutely dumbfounded. You wouldn't have a clue what you're supposed to do with that appliance
Yeah,
or any other thing in there. You don't know the function of anything or a lot of things that you never gave a second thought to when your brain was still healthy. So
yeah.
those are both good examples of what tends to happen to people who live with dementia.
So, what can people do to minimize their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease?
There are a lot of risk factors that play a role into determining whether we are at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease or um, a minimal risk. And I don't know how much time we have because it's kind of complex. So do you
We
want,
just have a half hour, so give us the abridged, a couple of
okay,
things people can do.
okay. There are four risk factors that are called non-modifiable. So
Hmm.
you can't change them. It's age, gender, um, ethnicity or race, and genetics. Women to date develop Alzheimer's more than men.
Mm.
Your age determines your risk factor, starting at the age of 65, and then it doubles like every 5 years. So your risk is higher at 70 and then 75. By the time any of us are 85 years old, 1 in 3 of us will develop Alzheimer's disease.
Mm.
And then there's genetics. There is a gene, a genetic gene called the APOE4 gene, and it can be passed down by our directly from either our mother, our father, or both of them. That will increase our risk. So you've got the non-modifiable ones off the bat. If all 4 of those apply to any one individual, they're at a significantly higher risk than somebody that none of those apply to. Then we have the modifiable risk factors. Those are lifestyle choices, diet, getting proper exercise, underlying health conditions. The number one non-modifiable risk factor, believe it or not, is cardiovascular disease,
Wow.
hypertension, high blood pressure. The differences and why that falls into the modifiable category is because if you're under a doctor's care and it's your cardiovascular disease or your heart disease is being treated, then you can reduce that risk back to not being, increased significantly. Sleep apnea has now proven to be a huge risk factor, but people who finally discover that they're suffering from sleep apnea or sleep disruption, they literally stop breathing during the night. And it differs for everybody, some a couple times an hour, some 40 times an hour, but it's treatable with CPAP. Um, there's a study that just came out recently that has now shown a huge correlation, much stronger than they thought before. And it might be surpassing cardiovascular disease as being one of the highest risk factors, is hearing loss.
Oh.
Yes. So hearing loss, again, treatable with hearing aids. Sleep apnea, treatable with CPAP treatment. Um, Diabetes is huge, but again, treatable.
Hmm.
So, so those are underlying medical conditions that increase a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. We have lifestyle choices. So it has been scientifically shown that there is a correlation between what we eat and our risk of developing Alzheimer's. The worst food that has been identified for us to put in our bodies is ultra processed foods.
Mm.
And they've been studying this for decades. Um, so ultra processed foods is number one, processed foods is number two. They recommend that we eat something like a Mediterranean style diet with leafy green vegetables and leaner meats. Then they're stimulating our brains. There's studies that show correlation between increasing our risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and basically being a vegetable, watching TV all day and not continuing to stimulate our brains. The two um, exercises that have been found to be the most powerful are learning a musical instrument. Evidently, the parts of our brains that we have to use to accomplish that is really works our brains. And learning a foreign language is the other one.
Mm.
Yeah. So, and then exercise, and they're not telling us that it's got to be the old way of thinking, that no pain, no gain kind of exercise that we were preached to for, at least me, for decades as I was growing up. It's walking 20 or 30 minutes a day at, a steady pace. It doesn't have to be a jog. It doesn't have to be a, really powerful walk but just get out there and get the blood flowing and things like that does help our brain function. So there are a lot more modifiable risk factors. Oh, air pollution, and that's really becoming a significant risk factor. There's been a lot of studies that have been done on pollutants, and these microplastics are getting into our brains, and there's a correlation between those and our risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So again, the point being is the more of these risk factors that apply to any one individual will only increase their risk. Does that mean they'll get it? If everything applies to me, let's say, no. But my risk just keeps increasing exponentially the more of these risk factors that apply to me as an individual.
Wow, wow, that's a lot to think about. My grandmother, who lived with me when I was growing up, had Alzheimer's, and this was in the 70s when care was terrible. They would strap her
Mhm.
to a bed. My grandfather took her to a facility, saw that they were strapping her down, and said, "No way," and brought her home. But today's care has changed. So, do you find that most people, when their loved one has dementia in the advanced stages, generally have to bring them to a facility that's trained to take care of people with that condition?
It's best to be cared for people who understand um, the best approach to providing a higher quality of life filled with meaning, purpose, dignity than what we used to see. And what you're describing dates back to the reality orientation therapy days where you corrected the person. And um, pharmaceuticals were used a lot more. Well, they're still being used probably excessively now, but that was kind of the operandi, I'd say back then, is you just keep people um, medicated
Hmm.
because it would minimize these behaviors that we
Mm.
see. So the shift now, couple things I've noticed since COVID, there seems to be a pivot now in the US, which is not customary for us because before we did tend to have our loved ones go into an institutional type facility. But because of what happened during COVID and people weren't allowed to visit and or enter the building, a lot accelerated the decline of a lot of the residents due to isolation and loneliness and depression. And a lot of people living in dementia care neighborhoods, units, died.
Mm.
A lot. I mean, the numbers were pretty significant. So families now have seemed to be making other arrangements. Either they're moving their loved one into their homes. A lot of these families still have children at home. We're calling them the sandwich generation. Or they are living in their own homes with as much caregiving as they need, depending on the stage that they
Mhm.
are at in the disease. But eventually, people will require 24/7 care, which is extremely expensive. So I've seen a shift in that. And it's interesting because this is our culture that we're changing our habits because many, many, many cultures in the world they just take care of their elderly. No
Yeah.
questions asked. They don't give it a second thought. It's us in the United States that since COVID, what we experienced and witnessed with dementia and the disease kind of changed our way of thinking about caring for our loved ones, especially with dementia, because there are so many safety concerns with them
Yeah.
due to their cognitive decline, cognitive impairment. So, yeah, I have definitely seen, and but that's only been in the last few years. Before that, oh no, it was especially with a dementia diagnosis would be okay. You've got to go into a dedicated dementia unit with caregivers who have been trained, but the training is way behind the times, especially since these institutions have lower occupancy rates than they did prior to COVID. But to answer your other question, it is completely realistic and doable to provide um, a high quality standard of care to our loved ones in their homes, in our homes. But you need to know the approach.
Yes.
And
And your books will really do help with that.
yes.
Yeah. And I applaud your work in this field because there's so many myths and there's so much fear around it, and people just don't know. And also, my mother is from a culture where we took care of our parents and had multi-generational households. And so it wasn't a it wasn't a discussion. It just was our culture. And hopefully Americans are catching up to that. And my grandmother lived for a long time, and the doctor said she would not have lived that long had she been institutionalized. And as a child, I learned how to care for seniors and how important it was. And it built empathy in me and my brother. And I went on to serve on the board of the Alzheimer's Association of Greater Washington, and I was their first chair of their first memory walk in DC. But it's
Oh,
really important to me that your work gets publicized, the compassionate care that we're all capable of, but
yes.
that many people think is too hard. It's not too hard.
Or they don't know it exists,
Yeah.
that there
Yeah.
is a better way
Hmm.
because it's not natural to us. It's not instinctive, as we talked
Not
about.
yet, but people like you and me are changing the narrative. So
Yes.
I thank you for that.
Hallelujah. It is about time, especially when we're being told by the World Health Organization and the Alzheimer's Association that if a cure or a treatment is not found by the year 2050, the number of people who will develop Alzheimer's disease is expected to triple. And this is globally from the number of people who live with it today in 2026.
Oh my gosh. So
We're not
exciting.
prepared.
No, we're not. But I thank you for your work in
Oh,
helping us get a little bit more prepared. So the work that you do is very taxing. And I ask all of my guests the following question. What do you do, Lisa, to become your best version?
I remind myself every single day because I have had a front row seat to the heartbreak that goes and the pain that accompanies living with Alzheimer's disease, just like you have. And when you have witnessed it, you've been an eyewitness, then um, what drives me is not wanting to see other people have to struggle as much. And so that's why I write books and I host a podcast and I have a show, other shows, and I guest on a lot of people's shows to raise the awareness that it is a heartbreaking disease, but it doesn't have to represent complete doom and gloom. that people do live meaningful lives. You just need to have to possess the right information to help make that happen for your loved ones or the people you're caring for. And that's what keeps me going is, you know, today, if I even made a difference in one person's life, it was worth me doing what I do. And I honestly believe that that's what drives me.
So self-care for you is helping others, that's what helps you feel better about yourself.
I'd say that's a true statement.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful, Lisa.
I feel very fortunate in this life that I am in now and that I've been blessed in so many ways. And it gives me a lot of happiness and pleasure to know that maybe I am truly making a difference to others out there who have kind of been thrust into this situation without expecting it or being prepared. And that's really what the key is to know what to expect and be prepared so you don't have to live on this hamster wheel and always be in a state, a perpetual state of reaction, that you can proactively manage this disease, and it's going to benefit everyone because you'll find that you have a much more harmonious relationship with the person who's living with it than you would if you weren't aware of the things that are available now to change the environment.
Yes, yes. I guess I would also like to make a plug for all of you who are caregivers to check out the Alzheimer's Association's reprieve resources, places where you can get a break and become a member of a support group with other people going through similar journeys. I encourage you all to look at
Actually,
allseniorsafeandsound.com.
I've changed my website.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah,
Well, what's your website?
it's called mindingdementia.com.
Okay. Well, go to mindingdementia.com to learn more and check out her books that are full of interesting and extremely helpful information to help you prepare if you notice that one of your loved ones is struggling with dementia, early dementia, Alzheimer's, anything along those lines. It has helpful resources and tips and can really help ease what is happening to you and your loved one. So thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the support of raising awareness about these diseases.